Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new episode. Today, in addition to Andrea and Alex, we're going to have Ryan. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Gentlemen, it is a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Ryan, I've read a lot about you. You seem to be doing a great job as far as it goes to football, or how they call it here in America, disgracefully soccer. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and also tell us more about your podcast?
I will. Well, first things first. Like I said, thanks a lot for having me on, guys. Technically, my title within the Scouted Hub is head of business strategy. The Scouted Hub's been active in the football industry for several years now. In the past, we've done a lot of recruitment support, working with clubs, the occasional agent, actually trying to find them players, clubs, that type of thing. Sometimes it's been very data heavy. We try and show a little bit of balance between kind of the raw scouting and the data. Recently, we've been doing a lot more marketing and branding and more higher level strategy, expanding into media, even software development, believe it or not. So our model's changing a little bit, but me personally, I mean, probably just like you guys, just a football junkie at heart, really. I'm a credentialed scout. I've coaching licenses as well here in America. Yeah, I mean, but my day job is I do consulting work as well. I have a couple master's degrees in business, CPA, so some of that's been fairly data heavy. So, but a disclaimer, I want to make sure that I am not purely a data scientist. I don't think you want me writing in R or Python. Things can go very badly. But yeah, I think I've got decent insight in terms of how clubs and teams use data. And I'm excited to talk about AC Milan a little bit today. I know you guys aren't going to be able to help yourself anyway. I do have a podcast for fun. It's called the American Toffee Podcast. I'm a huge Everton fan, as you may see over there. There's a long story behind that. But yeah, I mean, the data revolution is definitely in full swing in football or soccer. We can blame the English for that name. It's also worth noting too. I grew up. I played baseball as well growing up. I was a decent player, and so I kind of went through the whole Moneyball era as well. So I think that gives me a little bit of a unique insight because you see that thrown around all the time. I think the Redbird Capital Partners, the guy that came in, they talked about that several times, Billy Bean. And so, yeah, so hopefully I'll be able to add some sort of background and insight, and we can take the dialogue from there. But again, thank you very much for having me on, guys.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Yeah, we're a little bit curious about how you got to support Everton from Washington, D.C. and Arizona, from what you told us.
Yeah.
Like one day you woke up and said, I like this blue shirt, or is there something deeper than that?
Well, I will say this, probably no club on the planet has been kinder to American players traditionally as Everton. And that probably what started it. I really like Joe Max Moore as a player. That's going to throw some people off a little bit, which is like, wow, that's kind of a random guy. But you guys got to remember, like growing up in America, soccer wasn't on. Like my experience of soccer and watching it was literally going to the Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh, the Civic Arena where the Penguins played hockey, in watching indoor soccer. In fact, actually, one of my favorite players was Preki. I don't know if you guys remember Preki, who literally came out of the indoor soccer league and suited up for Everton in the top flight of England and actually did shockingly well. But that's kind of what we had. I was young. I remember the NASL, but we're lucky if we got the World Cup final on, man. It was strange. In fact, one of the earliest ones I remember was the 86 final, but I mean, that was kind of it. So this whole concept, how I got there, is even more ridiculous. But no, I took a trip to Liverpool in the 2000s and just kind of walked into Goodison, and the experience with the town, I was already a fan, but it hooked me in, gentlemen.
Well, believe it or not, the most an American player has done for AC Milan was not on the pitch. Actually, Onieo at AC Milan started a big fight with Ibrahimovic. I wish I would have seen that one, but I think
heavyweights.
Yeah, that's an heavyweight fight.
That was Godzilla versus King Kong.
Friends.
Yeah, and it depends who won that. Depends on what country you're from, right? That's exactly what happened. I think Ibra has finally conceded that Gooch might have gotten the best of him. So I would not. I mean, I'm not the smallest guy. I don't think I'd want to get in between those two.
No. Gattuso, I think, tried to get in between those two, and he got punched hard, if I remember correctly.
Oh my God, the Gattuso story where Ibrahimovic put him in a garbage can. I don't want to get us off track. That is one of the funniest stories I've ever heard in my entire life, by the way. But Ibra is his own guy for sure. Probably could have used him a little bit more this year, huh?
I know we could use anybody a little bit more this year, but I would like to start it off, Ryan, with data, actually, right? Because you do a lot of scouting. You know, that's like your bread and butter. You're very good at that. How would you say data has impacted your work, and how has data evolved over the years?
Yeah, well, it's kind of the environment of data in football is a little bit unique. I mean, you've got people working in clubs and you've got data providers, and then you've got a lot of kind of consulting teams and academics out there. And the nice part about that situation is you can kind of try and solve problems. You have more freedom to just sit around and think about things, and clubs really don't. But I would say the most common thing right now is within the recruitment cycle and scouting, you see most of it in kind of talent identification up front. And you see some data on the back end, kind of doing due diligence once you've kind of identified your targets. But I think the talent identification is really where the revolution, if anything, is somewhat happened. I mean, it's not that long ago when, it was just not practical to go scout some of these smaller leagues, especially ones that are farther away. And now almost every club really has the ability, whether it's through a basic data provider. I use YScout and Instat. Other people have, the bigger clubs have direct feeds from Opta and often can sign up for APIs and have real data scientists out there and, taking code and visualization's a big thing too. But yeah, you can really pull people. Some players just shine out of the data. So one way to you can't have a scout in every league, right? So one way to do it is, okay, let's look at past performances. Certain players stand out relative to their league. Maybe that's someone worth watching. And it just depends to what extent teams want to do that. Some teams are very sophisticated in terms of the models they put together. They're recruiting for a very distinct profile. Sometimes the lower league teams, they're just looking for good, affordable players. So to what extent that varies. But yeah, some of the more sophisticated clubs like, I guess Redbird, buying Milan is a good example. They obviously, they just recently invested in the FSG, which owns Liverpool. I think the classic example of data-oriented recruitment is when Simiakis from Greece came over. Basically, he's a mirror copy of Andrew Robertson. If you really watch the way he plays, it stands out on video, but the data was almost perfectly mirrored up. And I just laughed when they bought him because I'm like, oh man, that is just perfect. He's the exact profile, exactly what they get now. I don't know if he's worked out perfectly, but it's a good example of someone where once you get to a certain point, you're now recruiting for something more specific. And I think the data aided them a lot.
Ryan, I have a question for you. So let's say that tomorrow, everybody I'm sure this question, but let's say that tomorrow I wake up and I say I want to buy Haaland, but I cannot pay for Haaland, right? Are the softwares you guys are using pick up the data from Haaland and are able to find closer matches within certain parameters that have the potential to get there? Like, is that the potential that you guys have, or there is more work involved to that?
No, and that's, big clubs in particular could do exactly that. Now, that's a pretty unique player. But yeah, if you wanted a profile like that, sure. Now, there are a couple challenges with that. Number one, how specific do you want your model to be? Because look, if you're going to just support a recruitment function, I don't know if you want to be so specific where you just, the model's not going to be perfect. Some of the models can get very specific too. Event data is the big money grab out there in football. That's something that someone like the average fan certainly wouldn't have access to. And to know how to use that, where you have events out there plotted literally onto a field, how do you bring that to life? There's a lot of coding that's involved in that. But once you set the model up, you can just let it roll. But in terms of basic data, Rocco, it's not hard. Really, you can kind of find a couple of things that he's outstanding in. And literally, I can go into YScout right now and just filter out data in certain leagues at certain levels. And it won't be super precise, but some people will come out, Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to play quite like him, but there are a couple players out there that you might look at that might be, kind of like him. But yeah, it just depends on the club and how sophisticated you want to get. And having worked with several data scientists in the past, I mean, they can get pretty sophisticated. It's just a matter of how much you want to rely on the data or not. You have like Toulouse, for example, which is one of the Redbird team. I mean, I've never seen anything or read anything about a club that is so data oriented that literally the data is doing everything and the scouts are almost back checking the data. I've never seen something quite that extreme, but there you go. There's your example of one that is.
I mean, to be honest, they should change the name. They should go from FC Toulouse to AI Toulouse, because it's all artificial intelligence.
It seems like it, right? But there's a danger with that, Alex. I mean, to me, and that's why I like a little better balance, because there's a lot of discussion out there about the eye test versus the stats test. I don't see it that way, and I never have. Usually those things are totally in sync. The data is what it is. Now, that being said, the data is not always perfect, too. I mean, you and I could probably sit up there and throw like completed crosses and watch a bunch of crosses and come back. We could watch 10 crosses. I may say, well, I think he completed 5. You may say 4, and the data may say 6. So it's not perfect. I mean, data is limited. You want big sample sizes and things like that. I still think you've got to watch them. But if they've created their own data and they feel more comfortable with it and the stuff they're relying on, more power to them. So.
Ryan, starting from this point, Gerald Cardinale invested in Zelus Analytics kind of 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And after that, with Redbird, they bought AC Milan just last year. And which one could be for you the leverage strategies to approach the next future to become more competitive with Premier League teams?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? Well, to be perfectly honest, I think there are a couple different ways to do it. Data can be used in different ways for sure. And I will say for a fact, I know several Premier League clubs that use data and don't use it well. I know a couple that do use it fairly well.
Does one of them that don't use it well wear a blue shirt by any chance?
Well, they have, what's so sad about this too. I know some of the people within recruitment at Everton pretty well, and they're very good. Everton has a structural issue up top, but it's not that uncommon within English clubs. I mean, I think they struggle with kind of the modern football structure, which has been almost, done for years, I think, in continental Europe. But I will say this, there is one important element of the data. Like, you can have a great process for identifying players through data. You can validate them through due diligence. I'll give you several examples where literally us at the Scouted Hub, we've presented players to a club. Big Premier League club comes to us and says, hey, this winter, January, we really need a good left-sided center half. We're curious who you think we should go after. We do our presentation. It looks lovely, very professional, very pretty. And we know, because we've seen the data beforehand, that when we present guys, there's certain guys that we know the data says one thing and we think there's something different. There's always context behind it. So you've got to understand those things. But I'll say this, the biggest flaw that I've seen, at least in clubs in terms of data issues, is traditionally it's the role of the manager to identify, okay, these are the needs of the first team. All right, these are where our issues are. And then the director of football should, in theory, sit over top of them. They don't at Everton, I might add, Rocco. Just drives me bonkers every day, I swear. I just think, But anyway, in theory, the head of recruitment then takes those needs, synthesizes them, and says, okay, let's go figure out who our players are. Now, they may be doing generic target ID based on some general football identity all year round, right? But that pass-off doesn't always work right. You would think it would. I mean, what is the fundamental basis and identity of your football club? And shouldn't the manager match that? But if you have breakdowns in structure, like, and the data doesn't work, what good is it? I mean, in performance management, right? That's a key element of data within a club, which doesn't necessarily feed scouting directly. But think about it. Every club should have, and normally does, some developmental program where you're looking at key performance indicators for players, for both individual development as well as team performance. That should give you some insight during the whole year. Hey, where are we deficient? Especially in line with every manager has a particular way they want to play, right? I mean, some guys are more flexible than others. I mean, praise be to Carlo Ancelotti on his Milan teams, right? Christmas tree, all sorts of flexibility, adaptability, right? It was the thing of beauty. But not all modern managers are that way. A lot of them have kind of a preferred way they want to play. So I think it's that integration where you really see the biggest mistakes, not even necessarily in the ability of clubs to harness and use data. I think they have talented people to do that. But if it's not fully linked and integrated with the football, you're going to make mistakes, or it won't be as valuable. And you just got a bunch of smart guys sitting in the corner that really don't matter. That does happen a lot. So if they're going to take kind of some of the things they've learned with Toulouse, use the analytic company that they've invested in, they've got to integrate them fully in the process. And it sounds like Jerry Cardinale is very committed to that when he speaks. It seems like that is a focus. You know, his big thing is generating asset value, bringing out the value of AC Milan. And I think his plan is that the data should do that well. I don't know as well, top to bottom, how integrated Serie A is in terms of the data sophistication standpoint. But most big clubs have some smart people involved in it. But yeah, there probably is an opportunity there, though, honestly, Andreas.
But do you
sorry, Rocco, I want to keep 1 second about on this line. Can I integrate one thing? On this line, do you think that now we are something like in the middle from where we come from and where we are going, and mixing kind of two different approach, the old school and the new school. In this direction, do you think that companies will need to create managers that will be able to work in a different way? And when I'm talking about managers, I'm talking about even coaches. You know, something like a trainer of a football team will need in the next future to be able to use data different than before. What do you think about that? Sorry, Rocco.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you know, it's interesting. We're supposedly going into more of an era of specialization where the manager is just first team coach, right? They're not as involved in transfers, and frankly, there's no time really to be, you know, have many more duties. I mean, managing a first team is very, very time consuming as is. But now you're asking them to have a little bit more savvy and understanding of data and other things. So are you expanding their reach? I will say this. I think the best way to handle that, Andrea, in my opinion, is it's one thing to understand data. That's great. This kind of goes back to the Moneyball thing, but truly big deal. Do you understand the game? You know, I think it is so important, and maybe it's the director of football's responsibility to pick the right people to do that. One of the things that I always prided myself on, at least in the Scouted Hub, we always did is we always had scouts. We had guys that understood the game and the data. I think it's maybe the role of the data scientist group and the analysis group to bridge that gap better. You know, it's just so important to me for the first team manager to focus on the football. Now, if the data side understands problems, like the manager says, okay, here's the things that I really care about. You know, I want to make sure that I want to press high and I want to press effectively. Hey guys, you're the smart data people. How do you measure that for me? I think that's a better attitude because these analytic groups are trying to fight for relevance sometimes, Andrea. You know what I mean? You hear about it. Oh, data, it's really great. It's really wonderful. I'm telling you, there's so many smart people that are working that are just kind of in the corner. And to really integrate is really the key. I think it's the responsibility of data. People will get so mad at me after I say this. I know it. I'm going to get like a ton of messages, but truly, I think it's up to the data people to bridge that gap. Some would probably agree with me only because that's their experience. That's just my opinion. I don't know what you guys, I just think it's easier to go from there. I mean, first of all, why are you involved? Even if you're involved in data, I mean, come on, man, you're not in football to make money. I can assure you that. You're not. I mean, my day job's paying me a heck of a lot more to do data analysis than I would at a club. You know, so at your core, that's why you're involved in this, aren't you? I don't know what you guys think. I just think that's the role of the analyst and they're fighting for relevance. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's the system is gonna develop into sport analysts that actually are involved into the day-to-day and actually the tactical side, right? We're gonna see probably
very much.
Yeah, in the next 10 years, we're gonna see managers that are actually like quote unquote statisticians almost, right? Because let's imagine that in 10 years, we're gonna be able to plug Inter's team into the system, and they will tell us, by the way, this is how they play, this is what you need to pay attention to. That's the kind of formation I recommend. It's gonna happen whether
It's
you
already
want.
happening. That happens. That happens today.
It didn't happen to AC Milan, I can guarantee you that, because we lost 2-0 on Wednesday. Maybe somewhere.
Well, Rocco, it's interesting you say that, because last couple of months I was doing opposition analysis almost as a favor for a group that we were doing some other stuff with, and they had a new manager come in. It was relatively lower league level, so it wasn't necessarily the most fun stuff to watch. Personally, I was doing a lot of it, and I was a little surprised, a little bit of a younger guy as a manager, how much information he wanted that was data oriented. Now, I was happy about that, and I was happy that I could have a conversation with him a little bit more on kind of what the data said and what the stats said. That surprised me a little bit. So that kind of goes to your original point, Andrea. So maybe there's going to be more of a convergence. But I mean, you can get pretty sophisticated now. I mean, you can look at formations, average positions on the field, gameplay state. I mean, some of the visuals, I don't really get into the visualization as much, even though I'm kind of a creative person, at least background wise. But some people love it. And actually, that's another thing I've learned too. I could put slides together and put dots on a field and show movements and passing sequences that look like they're designed. But some of these guys are like, just show me the video, man. Just show me the video. Put your little markups, put some cute little arrows on it. Show me the video. So that's pretty interesting as well. But yeah.
I just wanted to share a question from Andrea. Hi, Andrea, by the way. It's not the same Andrea. You only asked the question speaking, by the way. He's not trying to sneak another question, I promise. It says, Mr. Ryan, some European fans, me included, have some kind of resistance thinking about data. Is it the same for the US fans?
Boy, that's a big question. So I'm going to go back to my Moneyball example. So when I was younger and in grad school, kind of Moneyball was happening. And I was doing some fun writing in between classes for a website that covered a league out in Arizona. And, I remember sitting behind home plate, and I don't know if you guys seen the movie Moneyball, but there's this great scene that everyone cites where all the scouts are in a room and they're spitting in their cups and talking about jaw lines, and the guy has no confidence because his girlfriend's ugly, like just ridiculous nonsense. And I remember sitting back there and just kind of laughing because these are those guys. And I only sat back there too because I couldn't afford a radar gun. So, I was looking over guys' shoulders trying to see, do you throw 95, 96? But I think the difference there, Moneyball was really about a way of looking at the game differently. It wasn't about the data because the data had already been there. I mean, there's 100 years plus of stats and information. And so I think in sports, soccer is a little bit of an anomaly in America because it's such a fluid game. I think it's hard to there's not simple data that can tell you a whole lot. In fact, most of the data that you see in Europe really originated in some American form of sport. XG, for example, was more prominent in hockey, basketball to some extent as well. So no, Americans, data is kind of normal. We're kind of used to it. We grew up with it. So no, there's not as much resistance, but there was resistance within the baseball community of looking at the game different and data making people irrelevant, but only because of one reason, because they just didn't see the game in the right way. And data was a way of gaining efficiency. Now, if you look at it, the scouts understand the data because it wasn't a major leap to do so. And now people tend to look at the game kind of the same, and the data, there's more of a balance there. So it didn't quite go all the way over to the data side where you thought it might have. It's the opposite way. I think there's just a misunderstanding in kind of how data is used out there in Europe. I don't think there's really conflict. I keep hearing that, I'll use my eyes. I've been going to games for 40 years and I know what I'm looking at. I'm like, that's not.
But that's data as well. If you want, it's relying on biased data based on, the fact that you are experienced, you've been in the game for so many years. So your data is more relevant than, somebody else's.
Interesting.
Or relying on unbiased data, so that's collected, that's sustainable, that's replicable, and analyzed. So it's not based on he has an ugly girlfriend, that's why he doesn't play well. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that's just bad data. I don't know what you were even thinking. You know, Alec, you make a really great point. And I think some things that why I really believe there's a balance is because data has not gotten to the point where it's all that predictive in soccer or football. I mean, you don't have that long of a history for it. Now, one of the things why the Moneyball revolution was so successful is you had 100-year of data. I mean, you could literally prove out your thoughts on the game, you know, why it was more important to take a walk rather than swing the bat. As a baseball player who was very patient at the plate, it used to drive me crazy when coaches would tell me, Ryan, you got to swing the bat. And now looking back at it, I'm like, God, if I was just born 10 years later. But yeah, I think there's some things, though, I would say, Alex, that I think the big curveball to the fan that they can't really explain is this. I don't doubt that I can watch a player and I think the predictive aspect of it and being experienced that I think I can do a decent job of decomposing the cause and effect. The stats are an effect. They're an output. They're a result. I mean, to really understand what's generating that, whether that's repeatable. I mean, how do you really measure a first touch? You know what I mean? That's hard to do. Could you do it? Yeah, I can think of some ways that maybe you could do it. Is it worth doing? I don't know. But the one thing you can't deny is that, look, I can't watch every game from every team in every league. So I can't tell you, like, I may look at an event, a single moment in time and think, man, that keeper, maybe they should have gotten that one. But I can't watch every keeper in the league, every single shot, every single instance. And my memory is not perfect. So at a minimum, you would think there is some basic core applications and data that are undeniable. And those are things that, I mean, that surely is going to give you some insight, I would think. But I think mostly it's just a misunderstanding too. The data is not designed to conflict with the eye test. I think in that particular instance, it's more information, Alex, is what you said.
But
and I
Ryan,
think yeah.
I've always had a curiosity, which I think Andrea might also be curious about, and Alex and I have discussed several times, which is the following. Let's say I live in Boston, right? Somebody in Arizona buys me. Yeah, I might need to see people with cowboy hats, but they speak English, same food, same fast food restaurants, same steakhouses, right? Now we go to Europe and you have 200 million subcultures within 20,000 countries. Now, I remember when I was in college, I actually studied in Boston. This professor of mine, he was specialized in understanding how people from different subcultures might integrate in another subculture and how the performance would be affected.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure if there are data models for that. So how do you see Europe overcoming that big issue with data? Look at the Kadeler, for example. Great players, but is having problems adapting different language and food and everything. Like, how do you see that being overcome?
Well, let's talk about that because that's a solution that we've developed.
Let's specify the Kadeler's girlfriend. She's not ugly. So
yeah.
He's a football player. There's no way you can. I mean, is that possible? Well, actually, so let's do the little exercise here, guys. So you tell me what things you think might be important and what data might be out there just for a couple minutes. And then I'll walk through, like, we tried to solve this problem at the Scouted Hub. Now, we didn't fully come up with a solution that was automated, but we thought about that. So we were thinking we were working with an agent or two or a club or two that have loans, the loan management.
To me, I think biggest difference, language.
Yeah.
Because they need to learn the language, food. Yep. Lifestyle, they're different, like customs. Like, for example, in Belgium or in Northern Europe, they have dinner at 6. In Italy, we have dinner at 8. You know, like these different styles of life that kind of can clash at some point.
Religion?
I would say background. In terms of the more of a sheltered background you have, the more of a soft upbringing you have, the less you are likely to adapt.
Good point.
I tell another
if your life starts rough as a child, you will adapt easily.
I read that players that come from nations that got conflicts, government conflicts inside, they receive more yellow cards than others, for example. And so looking deep, you can get very interesting information. I want to take one question because I'm very curious about the profile. I grew up at the beginning of my career working with human resources, and I think that one CEO right now should use data to understand which is the best profile of trainer with the players that they got. What do you think about that?
That's another one that we try to solve as well. So, all right, let me take both those things because I like some of the comments, Rocco and Alex, that you made in terms of adaptation, because that's key. So one thing we tried to solve is, and we were working with the Premier League club to do it. I don't know if we ever really did it. I've actually spoken to Everton about this as well too, because they just started with a guy named James Bond, who's a very bright guy, former player, has been their loan manager. They have a dedicated one now, and they didn't in the past.
What's his name again?
James Vaughan. So,
not Bond. Sorry.
Yeah, Vaughn with a V. Sorry, it's my Pittsburghese coming out there. Maybe I thought I killed all of that, but it might still be. By the way, Pittsburgh has a ridiculous accent. If you guys really want to be amused. Anyway, so one of the things we try to solve is for certain clubs, you've got players where, you have kind of a loan army. What's an effective loan? What is the point of a loan? Like some players you just have that you need to get off your books. Other players you need to put out there to showcase for a sale. But adaptation is really important. So some players that need development, maybe put them in a situation where they have to adapt more from a cultural standpoint. So what we tried to do is, we were gathering data from different lifestyle sources in terms of healthcare, other things, like all sorts of different country specific and then city specific cost of living indexes, nightlife measures. We're trying to blend all these indexes together to get a profile. And then we would literally had a survey that we would give to, we did this some for agents too, to try and find their players a club, and for clubs as well. And we literally give them a questionnaire. There are a couple big name players we actually did this with, which was hilarious responses, where you just go and kind of rate, low, medium, high. I think it's a little more sophisticated that I'm laying it out here. And you got kind of your matches. And for every question, we had a data set behind it. And you would get kind of this percentage of fit for countries, for cities. Now, a big part of this is financial, though. That's kind of the limiting factor. Some of these big clubs, you have guys on big wages, or for agents, you've got guys that are used to certain lifestyle and certain dollars. Some leagues are just not going to pay. So you could have the greatest cultural fit. I don't know if we ever fully solved the problem, but I think we had some interesting answers. And I know some of the clubs that we were interacting with have kind of run with some of it. I don't know the state of affairs of it now, but it's something we had as one of our solutions at the Scouted Hub, the loan management solution. And we also had like a performance management aspect of it too. The coaching, the manager profile thing is the biggest pain. I know some data providers that are literally focused on trying to do that. Some people claim they've done it. I know the guys at Toulouse have claimed that they've done it in their manager search, and they use some very specific data-driven stuff. Part of the issue is the data sets out there are not linked to a manager. And we talked about this in terms of loan management. If you want to send someone out on loan, do you look at the profile of the club traditionally and how they play? Probably not, because clubs, I personally don't think, have done a great job of sticking with the football identity and hiring managers to reflect that. Rather, they hire a manager and there's more changes than maybe they should have. But how do you get good data over the style of play of a manager? You can do event data, where they play on the pitch, formations. That's a huge one in a loan standpoint, right? Because, if you've got someone that's, in fact, I came up with this exact example. We're trying to find this a real world example, and this is going to move us in MLS a little bit. So we were working with an MLS club. They had a center half that was on big wages, and they were moving to a back four. He excelled in a back three. What do they do with them? How do we find them a club? This was part of a strategy we had, a product we had called a divestment. We always believe that if you spend a little bit of time on the back end trying to sell a player to the right place, especially young players, You could get a return on investment, and no club was doing this whatsoever in terms of sell-on fees. Some of the structure within MLS, there's not as much of a benefit of giving a big fee up front anyway. But regardless, it was very interesting in the data how it kind of melded and how we found opportunities there in style of play, formations. But I'm telling you, Andrea, it was such a pain in the butt. It almost required manual intervention to take playing styles and measures of high pressure, measures of structure, ball playing in the back. This person was very good on their feet. They could play it long. Who plays long balls? And we try to mix that with the cultural. It just became unwieldy to make it work. So we never quite solved the problem, and we had some good data scientists working on it, but I'll bet you someone probably has. But that's it. The data sets just aren't there linked to the manager very well, but the person that solves that problem is going to make themselves a lot of money or make them very, very valuable to clubs. So I love to talk to the guys at Zealous to see how they've done it. And we have interacted with them a little bit in the past. I haven't personally, but some of my colleagues at the Scouted Hub have. So when I read that, I was very interested in how they made that happen. But yeah, that is a massive. If you could do that, there's so many managers out there. I mean, that would be a really valuable product, I think, that clubs would be interested in.
And Ryan, sorry, how could cost to create a structure that can make me put a man inside and take data from his body, from his character, from his brain, the way of thinking? How does it could cost to create a kind of medical center like this? Because if I need to do an interview to a new employer, I want to know more. A normal interview, a CV, for me is not enough. I need to know the truth. And
Great.
I need to take all the informations that I can before to give you a job. How does it cost to create a structure like this? Because I think that we in football, with the money that goes around, I think that could make sense to create something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
I think Andreas is looking for creating a Frankenstein workforce, to be honest.
You know what, though? Some of the biggest transfer blunders out there have not been because the player wasn't good enough. It's because, the club didn't quite do enough due diligence on the type of character they are. And I think that is a big prohibitor from people maybe looking at places around the world that you may perceive as a cultural jump, or where their cultural norms are just very different. Like we've done some work in Brazil. The story, and we know some people pretty well that work in that environment. I mean, some of the stories I've heard about players and their attitudes about things is just blows my mind, like it wouldn't ever happen really in America. Well, so there are a couple different ways. So I don't know how familiar you are with the NFL. Well, the NFL does their NFL draft, and they bring in all these players for pre-draft interviews, but that's a set fix of people. They have something called the Wonderlic test. That's a personality measure, and people get scores. And I mean, I don't know if it's really a raw IQ test. God knows how some of us would fare taking that. But yeah, and I mean, heck, I live in DC, so it's investigations are a reality with me. So yeah, I mean, what are you going to pull them in and strap them to a lie detector and ask them personality questions? Or, I mean, it can be pretty extensive. I don't know how you go about doing that. I would think, and I'm sure, look, if you're going to put someone through a full medical, would you not put them through a personality test? Would you not? I mean, there's some people that's something where there's real world examples that you would think it'd be very easy to extract, but at what cost, Andrea? Like that's the question, how much, but I'll tell you what, if you're going to invest 10 million euros even and up in a player, I mean, is that not worth,
Of course.
Yeah, I would think so. I would imagine some clubs do some of that now, but it's something that I have to admit, I'm not totally familiar with. But yeah, if I'm sitting there as a director of football, knowing my tail is on the line, you better believe. And there is due diligence that people done, but they're normally done through intermediaries and people that and things like that. It's more person to person. But yeah, I think there's opportunity there for sure.
And guys, just so you know, we have 5 minutes because Ryan needs to go to work after. Unfortunately, we all work, guys. That's like But I wanted to do a little game here because, it is true. People are skeptical about data, and the AC Milan supporters are super skeptical because this year we are playing so wonderfully. So I wanted to do a little game. And Ryan, if you can't, that's okay. But whenever you have 10 minutes, plug in your data database and find us a center attacking midfield like Kessié, a right winger like Asensio, and a striker like Haaland. And I want to see what names you pull up that are decent fits to then show everybody else how data can let you discover talents. I think that would be a very interesting game to do because it would explain people the power of data. You might come up with a player and you're like, who the hell is this guy, right?
Yeah, and that happens. It's very amusing. You can always tell the teams that are data savvy because I've got some basic data models that I use to do my own kind of target identification, because one of my roles within the Scouted Hub is being current on certainly North America, but South America as well. So, I mean, I'm at home, kids are in bed, wife's just exhausted in the day, and I'm up until, 1 in the morning. Like last night, I was watching Liga MX because they were doing.
You were like, Everton should buy these guys, right?
Oh, don't even. I mean, man, I'm not even going to share my experience with that.
Don't rub it in, Rocco. Don't rub it in.
It's okay. I've accepted reality. I'm very zen-like about it.
We lost the derby 2 days ago, guys. At least Everton won 4-1, 4-0 last week.
5-1. Let's not forget the screamer that Dwight McNeil scored at the very end. Yeah, that was a strange result. So, but Brighton is a perfect example of a club that uses data extensively. I mean, what a deal. They sold Cucurella to Chelsea for ungodly amounts of money, and then they bought Pervis Estupiñán, who's debatably a better player. I mean, I think they use a blend of data, but yeah, you can do it, Rocco. I'll tell you, I'll take that challenge. I think I've got some guys in my mind too, because I feel like Haaland is such a unique player.
Yes,
there aren't many. I will say this, it's funny. Some of the biggest deficiencies in data in terms of accuracy are height and weight. Stupid, right? But yeah, but for some clubs, they really care about the physical attributes.
Oh, by the way, prick them tall, please.
With data,
for us.
is interesting to understand with data which is the best striker profile to put in the specific system of playing.
Yeah, but you don't need data. You need a Haaland.
No, that is easy.
But it's true. But no, you're not kidding, because like Giroud plays really well in maybe one very specific type of tactic. Does he play well? I mean, can you press high when he's in there?
Yeah.
Not really. Not really at all, So I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that Sesko is the only guy that profiles like Haaland.
I was talking a couple of days ago about him. I was talking about him 2 days ago.
I remember watching him a couple years ago when he first kind of joined Salzburg, and I just could not get over how someone his size could have such a first touch. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yes. Unless something goes drastically wrong, that guy is going to be a stud. Although I will say this, I'm always very skeptical of certain players that play in certain teams, because the data makes them look really, really good because of the way the team plays. In particular, the Red Bull teams. They're normally very direct, and it's great for young players to just join the team. They don't have to think too much. They play in a certain way, but I don't think that's necessarily the best thing for development. And I think if you look, there have been a lot of players that they've moved on that have not done well outside the club. But how do you do that, Andrea, in data? How do you decide?
Ryan, is it true that when you go in your software and you try to look for a player better than Zlatan, you get a message, nobody's better than Zlatan?
Yeah, and strange pictures of him in different outfits and intimidating you and things. Yeah, it's a problem. It's strange how that works. I don't know how that's programmed into everything. The guy's everywhere. What can you say? Did you ever hear about this when he got signed by LA Galaxy?
He bought the paper, right?
You're welcome, I think is all it said. Something like that. It's like, wow, that guy. Sometimes I don't know if he's playing a character or not. By the way, I have some basic data models that I run through Scout that I drop in Excel because I'm not going to pay for the API. And I did run them in for the big 5 leagues in Europe just to see where the Milan players shook out for this past year. And it was, very enlightening. I will say this: the center forwards did not look good. That was pretty interesting. But
that's why I told you to find one for us.
Didn't he also get like a signed jersey from LeBron James? So he signed it and sent it back.
Yes, that's exactly what he did. Unbelievable. Oh, what a classic. Yeah, as you would imagine, Rafael Leao looks really good in the data. Brahim Diaz looks great. De Ketelaere looks decent. More is kind of like, I have a couple different sub profiles for players, so it's interesting to see how they look, but it's not a lot outside of that. Benacer looks good.
Can I ask you something about Charles De Ketelaere? Because once AC Milan bought it last year, the Paolo Maldini and Mr. Pioli, they said that they saw him like a central attacking midfielder.
Yes.
But his history in Club Brugge was different. Rocco, close your...
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's
it was different. So why do you think that they saw? Do you think that they use data for that, or this is just human eye?
I will say this: the data does. If you looked at the data, at least that I'm staring at, I mean, I can see why he'd be profiled that way. I don't know. He's strange. Like I have to admit, from just a pure scouting, putting my scouting hat on, I'm always a little bit skeptical of someone with his profile of playing in the middle of the pitch. I think it's, he's really tall. I mean, just by nature of having kind of length and legs, I mean, unless you're just going to bully people physically in the middle of the pitch, I just think in the modern era with pressure and time and space is so small in the middle of the pitch. I think it's maybe a little bit better to have quickness in certain leagues. You know what I mean? Do you really have time to just drop and seal someone and use your body? And there are exceptions to every rule. I don't doubt that. But can you picture? I mean, it's so strange. If that's the case, what do you do with Brahim Diaz? Like, those are two totally different profile players. Yes. Would you put them in the same role? Because it does look like both played a lot in the middle, maybe more so than you would have thought.
I think none of them should play in the middle to begin with. They should play on the right, because Brahim Diaz is too tiny to play in that position. He gets bullied all the time.
Especially in Italy.
Yeah. AC Milan has a lot of problems right this year. But, I think what is going to be interesting is what's going to happen in the transfer market in summer. So just so you know, Andrea... his brother-in-law knows Cardinale, so get us those names. We will make sure to deliver them to the right people.
Well, it's funny. Yeah. I did send a message to one of my contacts at the analytics company too, just to say, hey, just so you know, I'm going on a pod with a bunch of crazy AC Milan guys. Is there any reassurance I can give them that the data is being used right? I didn't get an answer, but some of my other brethren at the Scouted Hub do interact with them a little bit, so I'll see if I can't get a little bit of a response. But look, I mean, they're saying all the right stuff. And can you argue about what Toulouse has done? I do think, though, it's a little bit different having success in, the second league of France versus Serie A. I mean, there's just a smaller player pool. I mean, you're talking about marginal gains here, man. Like, you've got to compete with Inter, Juve. I mean, these are teams that already have great depth. So maybe you can use data to buy down risk, to make sure that, hey, this is what we see in this player. The data agrees with me. I feel pretty good about it. But I mean, how many uncovered gems are you going to do? And I think your recruitment strategy is a little bit challenging. But yes, I would say this. The one thing they should absolutely do, because the issue is competing with like the Premier League and the Champions League. You've got to compete with them somewhat on revenue. And look, how are you going to do that? Look, the TV deal, I mean, how much can you do about that? That's
TV rights.
Now Jerry Cardinale says, he swears that he's going to band together and influence them to get more modern on TV revenue. And I mean, you guys are more familiar with doing business in Italy than I am. I mean, really? I think the other issue is you could make up revenue on match day experiences. Look at the difference between the Premier League clubs and what they're making on match days. Spurs last year according to the Deloitte Money League, made $125 million in match day revenue. Milan was what, like 33? I mean, how do you, again, new stadium. You can invest in a new stadium and do that. When was the last time a new stadium got built in Italy? What, Juve Stadium in like
there was a Colosseum in Rome a couple years ago.
I like that design though. The same guy did the design on the new Everton Stadium, American, Dan Meese. That was a cool, I like that idea. But yeah, why didn't that get built? I mean, how many times has Rocco Commisso been out there talking about the new stadium they're going to build in Fiorentina? Now that guy's a character. His whole diatribe on why it didn't happen. But look, so is me. I think the biggest impact that Redbird can make there in terms of catching him in revenue is the commercial revenue, because he has partners. He could maybe do that. But if he can't get a stadium deal done, if he can't get them to evolve a little bit from a TV revenue standpoint, how do you compete with the big boys? One way you can do it is in the transfer market. Serie A is tough though, right? I mean, Serie A, you have limitations in terms of non-EU players you can buy every year, right?
Yeah.
But you can buy them from Italy, provided someone else bought them, right? A year before, which is, I think, right, but kind of strange.
But you still have limitations on how many you can use and everything. But if I may, I think on a short term, one thing that Redbird, Zelus, and everything can import from Toulouse to AC Milan is how Toulouse have managed to have less injuries, because they've been talking about this. They've used data to analyze players, to rotate players, and slowly but increasingly they had the less number of injuries in Europe as a soccer/football team. So
2 years in a row, Alex, right? I feel like they're really skeptical of those numbers, and this year they're doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
know
on
the short term that's something that can boost or improve your squad performance in terms of results.
Yeah, also in rehabilitation too. I mean, there's a lot of data analysis being done in the sports science arenas. In fact, that's where a lot of it started. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the program Soccer Lab. We know those guys pretty well. But I was surprised when we got into their software, how much some of their partner clubs are investing in the data science aspect of it and correlating performance data and tracking data with, I guess I shouldn't be surprised about it, because that's always been something that Americans in particular have been way ahead of the curve on in training and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, they swear that they can do analysis and looking at soft tissue injuries and how to prevent them through load management is a big thing in America, but through investment in youth is part of it. Yeah, I read a little bit about that, Alex, too. Boy, that is fascinating, right? And it's certainly a risk of an aging team. How you do that through data and identify it specifically when I don't know. I mean, there are a couple gaps in data. Like there's not good financial information out there. I mean, transfer market's lovely, but it only gives you a ballpark. Salary wage data, it's almost non-existent out there that's reliable. Medical history, how accurate is it? How easy is it to compile that data? So I'd be very fascinated with how exactly they did that, but you can't argue with the results, right?
No, I totally agree. And overall, it's going to be interesting, guys, to see how this world evolves. But I want to be very cautious of your time, Ryan. I know you need to get to the office, right?
We can go for a little bit longer. I'm good.
Okay, cool. So I just wanted to let you guys know, me personally, in 6 minutes I need to drop, but you guys can continue your conversation. But Ryan, given your basically knowledge of this space, right? How do you think, I know that when I spoke with a few people involved with MLS, I know that, you guys now reach the level of the Mexican League. Officially, that's what they pretty much said. But
maybe.
How do you think a 5.2 million salary cap can even help those teams compete in soccer? 5.2 is not much. Then there are a lot of limitations in terms of the rosters.
Yeah, the effective salary is much higher because of GAM,
Yeah.
TAM. They're doing away with TAM. I'm going to spare your listeners from going through the details and the silliness of what that is.
Yeah, to lower some salaries and then the 3 players you can buy over salary, but
Right. Yep.
it's pretty limiting though, right? Like,
yeah, it is, of course. Well, I guess it's important to understand. Well, first of all, what do we, as an American fan, you know, if I want the American soccer universe to get better, obviously I'm interested in MLS getting better. I'm less concerned with MLS really catching up with Europe, kind of in a way. I just wanted to improve steadily, and maybe it's because I'm old enough to know the failures of the past. But look, all leagues in America that have salary caps are driven. The size of the cap is driven on one thing: revenue. So I would argue that increase in revenue. Now, look, they've got this new Apple TV deal. The production's much better. I mean, it's really access, it limits access. I don't know if it's the best thing. Obviously, there's some still stuff on Fox. They do pretty well with match day revenue. I mean, it is hard to ignore the purchasing power of the average fan in America, man. I take this for granted, but people spend, I mean, DC United games in particular, I mean, the tickets are crazy expensive to me. Maybe I'm just old and everything's expensive now, it feels like. But yeah,
they are.
I mean, I think, by the way, MLS is super data savvy. But look, they're going to have to eventually increase and expand the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement. They are gradually increasing the amount you can spend, but you've got this war in MLS between, the original investors in the league that were investing money in almost a defunct league at one point that want to get paid back. And these franchise fees every year that come in are not going to do it for them. You know what I mean? So I get some of their concern that, well, if we expand the revenue side or we expand the salary cap, my little team will not be able to compete. But look, if you increase the total revenue pool, things will get better. And I think the best way to do that is to start to expand its reach. Like, look, you claim it's as good as Liga MX now. I don't necessarily buy that, but fine. You won the CONCACAF Champions League last year. Why not make that a bigger thing? Because I think that's a cool event. I really enjoy it. How about working with the South Americans? Do you think that would be pretty interesting to see MLS clubs in the Copa Libertadores? That tournament is amazing. I mean, South America has a great opportunity. I think Copa America with national teams as well to really band with CONCACAF to leverage that North American market. The travel's a bit extensive, but you're in mostly the same time zones. I just think there's huge opportunity with the Americas themselves to make themselves relevant and more competitive. It wasn't that long ago when Brazil was thought of as debatably the best league in the world. Maybe again, I'm dating myself, but you know what I mean? I think those are the opportunities within MLS, but if you're not going to increase the revenue side of the house, it won't matter. And a lot of those teams, they don't want to tell you this. A lot of those teams still don't make money. They may make cash flow, but they're not technically making a ton of profit yet, but it is getting better for sure. I think, in my opinion.
But guys, I'm gonna take the chance
from
to
a
greet
media
everybody.
point of view. Oh,
Alex,
sorry,
one
Rocco.
second. I just wanted to greet everybody. Ryan, thank you for joining. Andrea and Alex, you are in good hands with them.
I'll give it a couple more minutes too. I'd like to hear what Alex has to say.
No, but we can. You are going, Rocco?
Yeah, I need to go because I have.
Okay. I will close it. I just asked the last thing to Ryan, and then I'll make him go. Thanks, Rocco. Ryan, no, about this. How do you think that the corporate can inside the new stadium, because actually without stadium is impossible to create a real new development, because I saw my brother-in-law he got a company that is called Colgan and Bauer, and he worked with Premier League since a long time ago, and he explained me that in Premier League corporate area inside the stadium, once the skybox are done to make people shake hands, so to create this opportunity, and they pay a lot for that. A chair is kind of $5,000. So stadiums are very, very important. Starting from that, how long time you need? Because when I talked with him, he told me kind of 15 years to reduce the gap with Premier League. Do you think so far?
Well, I'll say this. I actually don't think the Premier League does the greatest job from a hospitality standpoint. Now, the London teams have a massive advantage because so much of the commerce and so much of the wealth in England is there. I don't know. I think so. America does this incredibly well, but there's always such a corporate presence at these places. And that's something that, my dad is a commercial banker. He came from a long line of steel workers in Pittsburgh. Of course, we can't get away from that. But and he's a commercial banker, so he was kind of a deal maker, and he was involved in some of the sports teams in Pittsburgh too. And it was very fascinating to see how that kind of evolved. The problem is when you're building a stadium, you have to think like, how much should you allocate to that? How much revenue can you generate from that? It is significant. But other areas of significance too, though, Andrea, is how do you create an environment up front around the stadium to get people to spend money on drinks and beverages and food, and even after keeping them there. It's all very complicated. I mean, I think it's the facility itself. I mean, like, for example, how much can you do with the interior? Now, I've never been to the San Siro. I'm sad to say that. It's kind of frustrating for me. It's definitely on there, on my list to hopefully do it in the next year or so. Can you really configure the stadium inside in a way to provide more of an opportunity for the big business people to go in there and hobnob? And it's one thing to have sponsorships, but sponsorships have gotten very comprehensive now, in many different ways. I mean, now we're projecting digitally over the field different things. Here's an even more fascinating one. So do you know, in the NHL, the hockey league in America, so one of the big sources of commercial income there was sponsorships along the actual boards themselves, that, the border of the ice. Now, in local broadcasts, they will visually overlay the existing boards and put local commercial adverts like they're actually there over them. It blows me. So it used to throw me a curveball when I was watching hockey. And for full disclosure, I actually play hockey in my spare time. It's my non-soccer fun time, I suppose. I used to remember, okay, are we playing on the road or are we at home tonight? I would look at the boards to see, like, if we're playing in Detroit, there's surely going to be like a Little Caesars pizza ad there. I'm like, oh, we're playing in Detroit tonight. Now it throws me off because I see all the local brands from Pittsburgh, and I'm like, what just happened? They're overlaying them on the pitch now. Fascinating. But the point is, they've got these mixed commercial deals now where you get a sponsorship and multiple tier levels, and things come with it, and you get your luxury box and your seats for X amount of money. But it's that corporate dollars that, look, I should know this because I do consulting work for the government. It's a lot easier to spend someone else's money than to spend your own. So how do you get the corporate entities involved and integrated? You've got to give them a space, not just for advertising, but so they can show off their clients, so that they can get deals done and build the whole experience environment around it. I would say the one thing that Serie A also lacks in terms of TV revenue and exporting outside is the match day atmosphere. It's very difficult for Americans to understand, even though some of the stadiums are going crazy, that it's not full. I mean, that's a strange thing, right? So it's that buzz, it's that environment. Presumably, Spurs have done a very good job with that, to kind of create this. But there's also a certain level of artificial aspect of it where you've got to still cater to your true fans, man. I just don't. People don't want to go into a sterile, overly commercialized environment. I'm not sure even corporate people want that too. So I don't know where the balance lives there. But certainly in any new stadium build, if you can create spaces for that, your commercial revenue, and just look at the difference. Spurs, 125 million.
Yes.
Compared to, I think Inter had maybe the highest one in Serie A. Well, I think Juventus did, but they have different commercial deals. In terms of match day revenue, I feel like Inter's was even higher at like 44 because they had more matches last year, I think.
Yes.
In Europe and stuff. I mean, think about that. If that's the top in Italy, how are you compete? Almost every one of the Premier League teams are at like 100, the big teams.
I think we've done a huge circle, and we came back to what I wanted to say earlier, because this is kudos to you guys, because right now CBS/Paramount Sports, the match days and the lineup they have is just fantastic.
It is.
Because the other night you had Peter Schmeichel interviewing Paolo Maldini, whilst in the studio there were Thierry Henry, Carragher, and Micah Richards. I mean, you know, you guys are competing with BBC Match of the Day at the moment, and there's nobody else because the Italian TVs are not there in any way, shape, or form. French, German, not even. So
that drives me crazy, by the way, about Serie A, Alex. Like when I watch it all the time on Paramount. That's exactly how I watch it. I mean, occasionally on Y Scout if it's not on there. But like, where is the big studio? Like, if you want to take advantage of the American market, and that's where the Premier League clubs, their overseas revenue, I actually have the number down here. The difference is, I want to say their overseas TV revenue is like Serie A's 1/9 or 1/10 of what the Premier League does.
If I'm not mistaken, the last deal they've signed, it was 5.1 billion for the internal market and 5.5 for the foreign one. So you know what I mean?
Well, so put it this way: as a watcher of football, do you find the on-field quality any less or more compelling in Serie A versus the Premier League? I don't. I would much rather watch. I would actually rather watch Serie A. Maybe I'm more of a purist, and there's a little more tactical involved there too than the Premier League, especially now that Italy's kind of more goal scoring, things like that. So I don't think it's the on-field product. I think it's the presentation of the on-field product. I mean, I just think the history of the clubs there, I think it is so compelling and interesting. Yes, true, maybe the game day environment in some instances does not translate, but you can be smart about which games you select, you know, for the national audience. But where's the big studio? Where are the big personalities in there? I mean, are we seriously telling me that Italy's history does not have big personalities in the game that can't bring it to life overseas? I don't know. I think there's massive opportunities there.
And you know, I mean,
Alex,
I
sorry, we have to
I can
close.
understand the bit that is done for, you know, local public. So obviously, you know, you'll have the studio in Italian, but nothing stops you from having a studio in English.
Exactly. I don't know. I think North America in particular, like
maybe you cannot have Gary Lineker or, you know, Thierry Henry. I don't know. Bring someone else. It's just.
I don't think there are any lack of people that have played in Italy that speak great English, that understand the Italian culture. That, I mean, are you kidding? I mean, just think about the amount of Italian Americans too, just out there. I think you could blend it and just do a spectacular presentation. I love the style of play in Italy, and I think a lot of more Americans would too. But that's AC Milan is this massive brand that I think is underutilized as well. And I think that's a lot what Jerry Cardinale is talking about. Like, you don't have an option to get an AC Milan very often. And it actually has an interesting background too, and has good spokespeople that love it over in America as well. Andre, I know I'm sensitive to time now. So I probably do.
Yeah, I don't want to abuse of your time.
I know. I'm enjoying myself though, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, no. For us too. For me, it was a super big pleasure, and I think that 100%. Once we're going to share the content that we create today, will be very interesting, because this is kind of information that doesn't go around too much, especially in the mainstream. So very, very thank you very much.
Yeah, no, anytime, really. Let's do it again and bring some open brainstorming
time.
Might be pretty fun.
We will. Thank you very much. It was a very fun for me. It was fantastic. Very interesting to talk with professionals like this. So, thank you very much to join us today, Ryan. Thanks.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Ryan.
Very nice meeting you, Alex. Andrea, very nice. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. And yeah, I got to go to a meeting, just like Rocco.
We say bye also to Rocco, say bye, and thank you also to Alex. Thanks, Alex, to join us today. And see you soon. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.